Hello everyone, AuraTale here, and welcome one and all to a new chapter of this castle, this huge ginormous castle. I mean, look how big this castle is. We're gonna work on this today. In the meanwhile too, while we are working on this, I'm gonna go ahead and talk to you guys about what I've been doing with my past couple of weeks, how things are going around in my life, and I'll be answering some of your questions from down in the comments below. So if you do, why is there a block space missing here? Anyway though, oh, I think those are for ladders, right. So if you do have any questions for me that you want to have answered, just go ahead, post those questions down in the comment section below, and I will go ahead and answer them in the next video. I'm gonna go ahead and get this show on the road. I got a bunch of stuff, but I kind of need to sort it about, so we're gonna go ahead and do that a little bit. So yes, how are all of you wonderful people out there this afternoon, morning, or evening? Thank you so very much for coming on by. So I'm gonna go ahead and also start working here on my castle a little bit, and we're gonna just fill in some of the space here. So yes, thank you so very much for coming on by. We are currently working on the castle as we are right now. I actually need to replace these because I don't really like this. To answer some questions from the previous video, Neverending Loot had asked me, why the heck is there an ancient battery somewhere? Well, you see, ancient batteries were used to power something back in the day. What it was, I have no clue. But yes, apparently there was a Baghdad battery that was found some time ago. This Baghdad battery basically acts as a way to establish energy to a product using a vase and using some sort of acid from within. How they came up with this is beyond me, but it's pretty cool, really. Which actually leads me to another point. I really am wondering, was civilization really more advanced than what it was theorized to be? For example, back in, say, Greek times, were people just walking around without any kind of technology whatsoever that we have today? Like, for example, did they have, like, cars or something? Is it possible that they did have machinery or anything like that? I'm not entirely sure about that, but I'm a firm believer of Atlantis, to be honest, and Atlantis existed roughly 9,000 years before Plato's time, according to Plato. Now this comes from his teacher who worked under Solon, and Solon was the one who taught his own teacher there, and Solon had stated after going to Egypt that he found some information from the Egyptians about ancient Atlantis. Now, a lot of the things that they probably put in are probably some exaggerations and whatnot. However, they do state that 9,000 years before Plato's time, there was a cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis, which coincides correctly with the fact that 11,600 years ago, the time that Atlantis would have had this cataclysm, there was a total world cataclysm across the entire world 11,600 years ago. So it does make sense, really. Now, was it an ancient civilization like science fiction makes it out to be today? No, by a long shot, definitely not. In fact, there was a stone, a mineral that they used back in the day called orichalcum. Now, this orichalcum may have actually been some sort of metal of some sort that even the Greeks at the time didn't have. But they did have iron, I do believe. I'm not entirely sure if they did or not. So it could have been iron, it could have been something more than iron, it could have been steel. But the applications of the orichalcum seem to have played a huge role within the Atlantean life. Plus, they also had a large mega structure city, and there has been a lot of research as to finding Atlantis, and there are some good and interesting places where Atlantis could or may have existed at a long time ago. Such a city could have existed. In fact, there are findings of a city called Jericho that exists, and this giant city that was found underground existed somewhere around 8,000 years ago. 8 to 9,000 years ago, and that's rather impressive to think about. Of course, it wasn't some sort of technological paradise, but rather, it was more than likely just a highly advanced civilization for its time. just its time. And that's about it. So yeah, that's how I theorize upon it anyway. There's a lot of things that I think happened back then that we currently don't have in the history books. A lot of scholars, or a lot of skeptics rather, and a lot of critics say that scholars or scientists or historians are trying to hide it or bury it under the rug, but I don't think that's exactly the case. I think it's just human ignorance. We currently don't know what there is out there, and we can't say 100% that these were the things that were happening, because we don't have 100% proof of that yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and place down these as I read the next comment, the next question, which is actually also by Neverending Loot, and she asked me why I go on so many walks. And that's actually because I do go out on a lot of walks, quite a few really. But this is because, one, I just really need to get out of the house sometimes, and two, it's really relaxing, really refreshing, and I really do enjoy my walks. I think that walking is a good form of exercise. It's not the best form of exercise, of course, but it is a good one. And I enjoy it very, very much. It gets the blood going, it gets my brain thinking, gets the brain going, it gets my mind thinking on a lot of things, especially things around me in my current everyday today life. I really enjoy walking. It's so much time to myself to think about things, and I really do enjoy it. It's really nice out too. It's summertime, so that's an R+. Oh yeah, that's right, today is the very first day of summer, isn't it? That's pretty cool. So if you do have any questions for me, do be sure to drop them down in the comment section below. I will get to them in the next episode of Minecraft Survival. I hope everyone out there is doing well though. Thank you so very much for coming on by. Currently though, I'm just gonna continue working on this and talk more about Atlantis, because holy crap, my mind is really thinking about Atlantis now. So the reason why I believe that Atlantis did in fact exist is because it was knowledge that was passed down through the Egyptians some 2,600 years ago. Information that was not just passed down to them, but was probably also recorded in some way until it was lost. Now, instead of it being a written thing, it could have been that the Egyptians did speak it down through their priests and whatnot. However, I don't think that's the case. I think they did have it written down in some places, and whenever the Romans kind of came in and took over, a lot of that was destroyed. A lot of those records were broken down and ripped to shreds, or rather, smashed to shreds, because they wrote on stone, not paper. Solon went into Egypt to learn about this, though. He probably spoke to some priest within Egypt. Now, the priests back then in Egypt were not the same priest as what we have here, 21st century, but the priests of Egypt were more or less archive keepers. Essentially, these record holders, though, they kept on to a lot of this information, and they pretty much kept it going down the lineage, teaching it to their students, and so on and so forth. And one day, Solon decided to stop on by, probably to learn some more about philosophy through the Egyptians, and came across one of these priests who told him about Atlantis. And they told him that Atlantis had existed 9,000 years prior to Plato's time. I mean, Plato wasn't born yet, but if I remember correctly, Solon was 240 years before Plato's time, and it was through Solon's pupil that Plato ended up learning about all of this, and they finally archived it. Now, here's the other thing, too. But even then, you have to play the telephone game, because a lot of these people are writing down what they're hearing in conversation. These are philosophical discussions that these people are having. So there may have been some miscommunication between Solon and his disciples down to Plato. There may have been some miscommunication between Solon and the Egyptians. There's also the language barrier to consider too, as the Egyptians didn't speak the same language as the Greeks at that time. It's possible that there was a translation error, or maybe perhaps Solon did know how to speak with the Egyptians directly, but not perfectly. As far as Atlantis goes, I believe that such an ancient city probably existed, not in the same way that the Critias or the Timaeus may have spoke of it, but quite similar, very similar in fact. Some things missing, some things exaggerated. Overall, it's lost history, unfortunately, but it's history nonetheless, and it's wonderful history. In fact, I would really love to know the truth behind Atlantis, but unfortunately, we're never gonna know what the truth behind Atlantis was. Hey, what's this? Oh, it's a bunch of torches and stuff. Okay. Some melon seeds, I don't need any of those. Now, one of the most fascinating things to me, though, about the Atlantean history is that it has actually sparked many discussions, both about philosophy itself and history as well. It makes you think maybe it really did exist, and it also makes people think about their intentions, because the story about Atlantis that Plato gives is that it was through their own hubris that their entire kingdom or empire had ended up falling. Sure, it did offer a life lesson, but it may also hold historical value to it as well. And to dismiss it, it kind of seems tragic, really, because if we are really dismissing it as factual history, or possible factual history rather, then that leaves us with a gap of time and a gap within our history that shows nothing happened, which, in my opinion, a lot actually did happen in the time of 11,600 years ago, because there was the cataclysm, as I mentioned before. Clovis' comet hit about 1,200 years prior to that, so that could have sparked the glaciers to start raising and Atlantis to sink eventually. And while yes, it may not all be true, there might still be some truth to it. And to dismiss all of it as fictional, it just is mind-boggling to me. I feel like it really could have been the case. It could have been real. And speaking of Atlantis, I actually did want to mention, I am currently working on a side project. And in fact, let me go ahead, get back up to my place. I may rest in bed because I'm pretty sure it's nighttime. And I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a sneak preview of a project that I am currently working on. It's a huge and massive project that I would like to finish one day, but I don't want to really get started with it until I eventually get back to streaming. So then that way we can work on it in real time. And maybe I could even talk about the history of Atlantis and whatnot during it all too. So let me go ahead, rest, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is Atlantis. Now this right here isn't a true size to what Atlantis actually was. This is actually an approximation of about, I think this is like a 1/8 scale is what I have it as, but it's still a massive area nonetheless. And I kind of want to recreate Atlantis, or rather Plato and Solon's depiction of Atlantis here within Minecraft. And I've only just begun, but this is the entirety of it on the map. Just look at this thing, it's massive. Now I have these little locks here and there as well. I actually kind of want to make it so they go towards the south, because if I remember correctly, the locks actually point towards the south and not to the east. But check it out. Look at these locks that I made. So these locks are pretty cool in my opinion. All you gotta do is just do that. Fill it up inside, of course. There we go. And you close this, and you turn this off so that the way the boat goes down. And you open this up, and then the boat exit just like that. It's a really crafty and nifty little lock system, if I do say so myself. I'll go ahead and probably also make a how-to tutorial on this at some point as well. And I got this replicated twice more, once right here and then once down here. And essentially, this is going to be a huge, massive city at some point, where we have the palace in around there. I do believe this is a garden of sorts on this first ring. The second ring of land is some upper class housing, but there's also a track that goes all the way around where the ancient Atlanteans would actually race on it. And then there's this outer area, which is where the actual city is. And actually, even further beyond that, there's going to be farmland encompassing the area. It's something that I have been working on. And if you haven't noticed, too, if you didn't notice with the lock system before, the water up here is actually higher than the water down below. And that's because these rings, these bits of land, are actually going further and further down. It's almost like a dome type of shape. So over there, it's 2 blocks higher than what it is right here. And even this is a block higher than, say, right over there. Essentially, this is a big project that I would like to work on one day. And it's going to take a big, hefty amount of time to complete one day. But yeah, I think that's about all I'm going to show for today. Thank you all so very much for coming on by. I really appreciate you coming on into the episode. If you guys have any questions, do be sure to drop them down in the comment section below. If you did like this video, do be sure to drop a like down below as well. And I hope to see you guys in the next one. Until then, have fun.